The first thing I saw when I came back to my family's cabin was a brand new chain wrapped around my grandfather's gate. The metal links were bright silver in the late afternoon sun, too clean, too new, too deliberate to belong anywhere near that old cedar post my granddad had set by hand in 1968. I killed the engine and just sat there for a second, listening to the tick of my truck cooling off in the mountain air. The valley still smelled the way I remembered it. Pine sap warming on sunlit bark. Damp earth under the shade. A trace of Cold Creek water riding the wind down from the upper ridge. For one stupid half-second, I let myself believe nothing had changed. Then I saw the sign bolted crooked onto the gate. Private HOA access. Residents only. My hand tightened around the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I had been gone 11 months. 11. I wasn't coming back to a vacation cabin. I was coming back to the only place on earth that had ever felt like the truest version of home. My name is Ethan Walker, and that cabin sitting a quarter-mile past the gate wasn't some weekend rental or forgotten shack in the woods. My grandfather built it with his own hands on the floor of Black Hollow Valley, back when this part of Colorado still belonged to men who carried fence pliers in their coat pockets and knew every bend of a creek by memory. I learned to cast a line in that valley. Learned to split cedar kindling behind that cabin. Learned the shape of weather by the way the light hit the western ridge around for in the afternoon. Every important thing in my life seemed to leave a fingerprint somewhere out there. The old footbridge over the creek. The white scar on the aspen where I carved a crooked W at 12 years old. The flat limestone marker near the bend in the road with our family initial chiseled into the corner. Those details lived in me so deep they felt less like memories and more like bone. So when I stepped out of the truck and heard a golf cart buzzing down the gravel like an angry hornet, I already knew whoever was driving it had no idea what kind of mistake they were making. She came. Around the bend in a cloud of dust wearing white capri pants, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. It was the expression people wear when they think they're about to put someone in their place. "Can I help you?" she called out before the cart had fully stopped, voice sharp enough to strip paint. I glanced at the badge clipped to her polo shirt. Brenda Whitmore. HOA president. Of course. Yeah, I said, looking back at the chain on my gate. You can start by telling me why there's a lock on my road. Her mouth twitched like I'd insulted her personally. This is private community property now, she said. If you're here to sightsee, you'll need clearance. I actually laughed then, once, low and dry, because the absurdity of it landed before the anger did. She thought I was some outsider. Some drifter with a truck and boots and no business being in her polished little mountain development. She thought the cabin behind that gate was just an eyesore at the edge of her map. What Brenda Whitmore didn't know, standing there with dust on her white shoes and authority in her voice, was that the road under her golf cart, the creek singing behind the trees, the ridge catching the evening sun, and every acre stretching between them had belonged to my family long before her HOA ever printed its first welcome packet. I did not tell Brenda any of that. Not yet. I just stood there with one hand resting on the warm hood of my truck while the wind moved through the pines behind me with that long hush I had heard since childhood, the kind of sound that makes silence feel alive. Brenda took my pause for uncertainty. People like her always do. She straightened in her seat and tapped a manicured fingernail against a clipboard like she was already halfway through writing me out of the picture. This road services Black Hollow Preserve, she said, drawing out the last two words like they belonged on a brochure. The Homeowners Association maintains access, security, and trail management for residents. If you have business here, I can direct you to the public overlook parking area. The public overlook. I looked past her shoulder toward the ridge line and felt something cold settle under my ribs. When I was 10, my grandfather used to park his old Ford half a mile up that same road and make me walk the rest with him at sunrise because, as he liked to say, land introduces itself better on foot. We would stop by the creek where the water narrowed between two granite shoulders, and he would point with his coffee mug instead of his finger. That bridge, he would say, your father replaced those planks after the flood of '82. That stand of aspen, your grandmother planted those saplings from rootstock she hauled in the back of a station wagon. That marker stone, do not ever let anyone tell you it is just a rock. It is a boundary, and boundaries matter. Back then I did not understand why he repeated things like that. I thought grown men just liked hearing themselves talk. Standing there now with some woman from an HOA telling me to use a public overlook on my own family road, I finally understood every word. You maintain access? I asked. Brenda gave me a tight little nod. We improved it. I looked down at the gravel. Fresh grading marks. Tire grooves from utility carts. A strip of decorative split rail fencing where open meadow used to run right up to the bend. They had not just touched the valley. They had styled it. Polished it. Sanded off the rough edges that made it real. I could smell fresh stain on the fence posts even over the scent of spruce and creek water. Somewhere uphill, a generator hummed with that thin mechanical buzz that never belonged in this place. Improved it for who? I asked. For the community, she said, like that settled everything. Then she lifted the clipboard and read off my truck plate number out loud, slow and smug, making a note beneath it. I am going to need your name for the trespass log. That almost made me smile. Not because it was funny. Because my grandfather had predicted this exact kind of person years before any development ever crept into the valley. He used to say the first thing newcomers do when they want to own a place is rename it. The second thing they do is start keeping lists. Black Hollow Valley had become Black Hollow Preserve. A family road had become managed access. A gate my grandfather built had become HOA security. I could feel the old lessons clicking into place one by one, like tumblers inside a lock. Ethan Walker, I said. Brenda froze just long enough for me to notice. It was small. A flicker, nothing more. But it was there. She knew the name. Maybe from a plat map. Maybe from some old filing. Maybe from a conversation she thought she had already buried. Then her expression smoothed right back out. Well, Mr. Walker, she said, all sugar and frost, whoever you used to be up here, things have changed. I looked past her again toward the cabin hidden in the trees, toward the footbridge, the old stone marker, the creek threading silver through the valley floor, and I realized she was right about one thing. Things had changed. The only problem for Brenda Whitmore was that she thought she was the one who had changed them. Brenda flicked the clipboard shut like the matter was finished, then pointed past me toward a gravel turnout I had never seen in my life. You can leave your vehicle there and speak with the management office tomorrow morning, she said. They can explain parcel access policies and recreational boundaries. Recreational boundaries. I tasted that phrase for a second and almost laughed again. My family had buried a dog on that slope above the creek. My father had patched roof shingles on the cabin during a hailstorm that came through in '96. I had spent one August sleeping on the porch because the air inside was too hot and the sound of the water below made the whole valley feel like a living thing breathing in the dark. And this woman, with her laminated badge and polished golf cart, was calling it recreation. I am not here for parcel access, I said. I am here to go home. Brenda tilted her head with that practiced little expression people use when they want to sound patient while being insulting. Mr. Walker, there is no active resident registered on this tract. The structure is listed as a non-compliant legacy building pending review. We have sent notices for months. Notices. That word hit me harder than I expected. My cabin was off-grid except for backup. Power and regular mail had always gone to a post office box in town, the same one my grandfather used. I had been working 12-hour days the past year restoring a historic lodge outside Durango, living out of a rental cabin with dust in my boots and sore marks on my hands, trusting the valley would still be there when the job was done. My family had owned land in Black Hollow for 3 generations. It had never occurred to me that while I was gone, someone in pressed white clothes and expensive sunglasses might start mailing paperwork into the gap between memory and bureaucracy until they could pretend history had expired. Pending review by who? I asked. The board, of course. She said it like the board had descended from the mountain with stone tablets. Your cabin is inside the preserve overlay now. There are community standards. I looked uphill and finally saw it through the trees, a flash of painted wood where bare timber used to be. They had added trail signs. Little decorative arrows nailed to posts, all matching, all neat, all wrong. One of them pointed toward the creek crossing and read Heritage Walk in tasteful dark green lettering. Heritage. The nerve of that almost took my breath away. My grandfather never used words like that. He called things what they were. Road. Fence. Water. Deed. He had no patience for polished language that tried to turn ownership into ambience. I stepped closer to the gate and the chain scraped softly as I rested 2 fingers against it. New steel against old cedar. Cold against warm. Fake permanence against the kind that earns its place over decades. Brenda's voice sharpened. Do not touch association property. I turned and looked at her for a long moment. The breeze shifted and brought the smell of someone grilling from one of the new ridge homes above the valley, mixed with fresh mulch and cut grass and the faint chemical note of stain drying on treated lumber. Development had a smell all its own. Manufactured comfort. Fast money. Things arranged for brochures. Underneath it, though, I could still catch the creek. Still hear it threading over stone the same way it had when I was 8 years old and fell in chasing a trout shadow. Some things were stubborn that way. Thank God. Association property, I repeated. That is what you think this is. Brenda gave me the smile again, smaller now, tighter around the edges. I do not think, Mr. Walker. I manage according to recorded documents. There it was. Not just confidence. Paper confidence. The most dangerous kind, because people who hide behind forms and filings never believe they're doing anything wrong. They just move lines on maps and wait for the real world to obey. I nodded once, slow, like I was accepting bad news. In truth, I was doing something else. I was listening. To her words. To the way she said recorded documents. To the way she did not say deed. To the way she kept calling the valley a preserve and my cabin a structure and my road an access point. People tell you exactly where the weakness is if you let them talk long enough. And standing there with mountain light fading gold through the trees and a trespass log in her lap, Brenda Whitmore was already telling me more than she realized. By the time Brenda rolled her golf cart back toward the ridge homes, the light had gone honeygold across the valley floor, and the chain on the gate looked even brighter, like it wanted to be noticed. I stayed there another minute after she disappeared, listening to the hum of her cart fade into the evening and the creek rise back into the silence she had interrupted. Then I got in my truck, back down the road, and headed into town with a pressure in my chest that felt old and familiar. Not panic. Not yet. Just the hard weight of knowing somebody had laid hands on something sacred and wrapped it in paperwork. Black Hollow sat about 18 miles outside town, tucked behind a bend in the county road where the mountains started closing in and the new money homes gave way to feed stores, gas pumps, and old brick storefronts that still had real names painted on the windows. I pulled into the lot beside Miller's Market because I knew 2 things for certain. First, small towns always know more than official offices do. Second, if Brenda Whitmore had been turning my family land into a polished little community asset, somebody in town had seen it happen. The bell over the market door gave its usual tired jingle when I stepped inside, and the place smelled like coffee, cedar cleaner, and fresh cardboard. Same as always. Hank Miller looked up from the counter, squinted once, then broke into that slow grin people get when memory takes a second to catch up with the face in front of them. Well, I will be, he said. Walker boy. Nobody had called me that in years, and hearing it nearly knocked the air out of me. Good to see you too, Hank. He came around the counter and shook my hand with both of his rough palms, flour dust on one sleeve, eyes sharp as ever. You heading up to the cabin? Tried to, I said. Got stopped at my own gate by an HOA president with a clipboard and a chain. Hank's smile dropped clean off his face. He let go of my hand and looked past me toward the windows like the valley might somehow be visible from town. So it finally happened, he muttered. What finally happened? He exhaled through his nose and lowered his voice, though there was nobody else close enough to hear. They have been dressing that place up for months. Trail markers. Brochure photos. Fancy signs. Folks coming in on Saturdays asking where the overlook is. I figured you knew. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. Somewhere in the back a cooler compressor kicked on with a low mechanical hum. Everything around me stayed ordinary while my stomach went cold. Knew what? I asked. Hank leaned one elbow on the counter. That development on the ridge, Silver Pine Reserve, they have been selling the Valley View like it comes with the houses. There is a welcome packet now. Scenic walking trail. Private creek access. Heritage Bridge. I saw the pamphlet myself. Heritage Bridge. My grandfather's footbridge. I could suddenly picture one of Brenda's tasteful green signs nailed near the rail, pointing strangers toward the place where my father taught me how to test rotten boards with the heel of my boot. Hank gave me a long look. I thought maybe you had cut some deal. Or maybe there was a lease filed. There was no deal, I said. And no lease. He nodded once, grim. Then you need to talk to Louise. At the recorder's office first thing tomorrow. Before the board feeds you a prettier lie. I bought a coffee I did not want just so I would have something warm in my hand while I stood there thinking. Through the front window the sun was slipping behind the western ridge, painting the town in that copper light you only get for about 10 minutes each evening. My grandfather used to say that was truth-telling light. It flattened nothing. Softened nothing. It showed dust in the air and cracks in old paint and just how far weather had worked its way into a place. As I stood there with cheap coffee and road grit on my boots, I realized Black Hollow had been getting renamed, polished, and sold one careful layer at a time while I was gone. And the worst part was not that Brenda thought she could keep me out. It was that she had already convinced other people she belonged there more than I did. The recorder's office opened at 8 sharp, and I was parked outside by 7:30 with a paper cup of diner coffee cooling between my hands and a stack of old frustration settling into something cleaner. Morning in town came with its own soundtrack. Delivery trucks backing up. A flag snapping above the courthouse lawn. The low hiss of sprinklers hitting already damp grass. Ordinary sounds. Honest sounds. Nothing like the polished hush Brenda had tried to drape over Black Hollow. The county building itself had not changed since I was a kid. Same red brick. Same brass handle worn smooth by generations of hands. Same cool dry smell inside, like old paper, toner, and radiator heat no matter the season. Louise Harper sat behind the public records counter in half-moon glasses with a pencil tucked into her silver hair and a mug that read "Do not rush the archivist." If Hank Miller knew what was really going on, Louise was the person who would know how it had been made to look legal. She glanced up when I walked in, then narrowed her eyes for half a second before recognition settled in. "Ethan Walker," she said. "You look like your father when he was trying not to be mad." "That is not the worst thing anybody has ever told me," I said. Her mouth twitched. "What do you need?" I said both. Hands on the counter and kept my voice even. "I need to know what has been filed on Black Hollow Valley in the last 2 years. Parcels, access changes, overlays, easements, anything tied to Silver Pine Reserve or the Homeowners Association." Louise did not answer right away. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, then at the public area behind me to make sure nobody else was close. "You went up there already?" It was not a question. "Got trespassed from my own gate by a woman named Brenda Whitmore." Louise let out a long breath through her nose, the kind bureaucrats say for situations they have been expecting and dreading at the same time. "Come on," she said, lifting the hinged section of the counter. "Public terminal is slow as Christmas. I will show you the index in back." The archive room was cooler than the front office, lined floor to ceiling with grey shelving and map drawers that smelled faintly of dust and linen paper. Louise moved through it like a person walking through church. Careful. Familiar. Respectful. She sat at an old county terminal, typed in the parcel family name, then added the legal block references I knew by memory because my grandfather used to make me repeat them at the dinner table as if land descriptions were scripture. Section numbers. Boundary notes. Water corridor references. The screen blinked, loaded, then filled with entries. My first feeling was relief. The Walker parcels were still there. The family name had not vanished. Nobody had managed that much. But then Louise clicked deeper and my relief thinned fast. There it was. Preserve overlay designation. Scenic use language. Shared access interpretation request. There were cross-references to the Ridge development and a neat little chain of filings designed to make the valley feel adjacent to them, associated with them, almost naturally connected. Not ownership. Not exactly. Something sneakier. Something dressed in official language but hungry underneath. Can they do that? I asked. Louise pursed her lips. They can file almost anything. Getting it approved cleanly is another matter. She clicked open a scanned map attachment and turned the monitor slightly toward me. My eyes went straight to the road, then the creek, then the footbridge icon marked as a point of heritage interest. Heritage interest. I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. There was my family land, flattened into color blocks and pleasant labels by somebody who had probably never stepped in creek mud a day in her life. This makes it look like the valley is part of the development experience, I said. That was the idea, Louise replied quietly. The county never transferred ownership. But somebody got very ambitious with descriptive filings and amenity language. My jaw tightened. Somebody. Louise gave me a look that said names mattered less than paper trails. Then she opened one more attachment. Here is the interesting part, she said. They kept referring to the cabin tract as a legacy structure parcel. Small. Isolated. Limited use. But they never pushed past the core parcel because the outer boundary records were old and messy. I leaned closer. Messy how? She tapped the screen with one finger. Old ranch surveys. Family subdivisions. Hand-drawn annex notes. Water corridor references going back decades. In other words, the kind of mess that scares developers because sometimes old paper is bigger than new assumptions. And right there, with the archive room humming softly around us and my grandfather's old legal descriptions glowing on a county monitor, I felt the first real shift. Brenda had not locked me out because she had everything. She had locked me out because she was hoping I had forgotten where to look. The county archive gave me enough to know Brenda had not built her little kingdom on certainty. She had built it on fog. Descriptive filings. Preserve language. Amenity maps. Enough paperwork to make strangers assume the valley belonged to Silver Pine Reserve, but not enough to survive real scrutiny. Louise printed what she could, slid the copies into a manila folder, and lowered her voice before handing it over. If I were you, I would start at the cabin records your grandfather kept himself, she said. Older families never trusted county indexing to tell the whole story. That sounded exactly like him. My grandfather trusted fences, not promises. Survey stakes, not sales talk. He believed the truth about land should exist in more than one place because paper had a way of wandering when money got involved. By 10:30 I was driving back up toward Black Hollow with the folder on the passenger seat and the morning sun climbing hard over the ridge, turning every windshield in Silver Pine Reserve into a white flare. The development looked different in daylight. More finished. More deliberate. Fresh stone entrance markers. Perfect timber frames that had probably come off a truck pre-cut and numbered. Landscaping so new you could still smell fertilizer under the mountain air. At the welcome kiosk near the first bend, there was a mounted display case with property brochures and trail maps under glass. I slowed just enough to see the headline on the top pamphlet. Live above it all. Private mountain charm with curated valley access. Curated. That word sat in my head like grit between teeth. My family had cut deadfall off that road after storms. Repaired washouts. Cleared brush by hand. Hauled lumber over the creek when the old bridge needed bracing. And now some developer with soft hands and a branding consultant was calling it curated. I kept driving and parked half a mile below the gate where the old service pull-off curved along the tree line. Then I took the rest on foot. The trail through the lower timber was still there, narrow and half-hidden, the one my father used when the main road washed out in spring runoff. Pine needles softened my steps. The air held that clean cold smell you only get near moving water and shaded granite. Every so often I caught a whiff of sun-warmed sap, and beneath it something older settled into me. Familiarity. Direction. The valley had not forgotten me, even if Brenda had tried to teach everyone else to. I reached the cabin around noon from the backside rise above the creek, and for a moment I just stood in the shadow of the trees looking down. There it was. Same pitched roof. Same stone chimney. Same porch line my grandfather framed by eye because he trusted level ground more than level tools. But they had touched it. That was clear immediately. The old weathered mailbox post at the trail split was gone. In its place stood one of those tasteful carved signboards with routed lettering that read Heritage Cabin Viewpoint. Not cabin. Not Walker Cabin. Not private residence. Viewpoint. There was a fresh gravel apron near the road shoulder where people could stop and take photos. Someone had hung flower baskets off the porch beam. Flower baskets. On my grandfather's porch. I could smell potting soil and wet cocoa liner from where I stood uphill, and it made my jaw tighten so hard it hurt. Then I saw the detail that changed everything. Near the side window, half hidden by a stack of bundled trail fencing, sat an old green steel box I had not seen in years. Rust on the corners. Brass latch gone dull. My grandfather's field lockbox. He used to keep tools in it once, then records when he got older and decided paper should stay near the land it described. Tax duplicates. Survey notes. Water corridor sketches. Easement copies folded into quarters and tucked inside wax sleeves. He kept that box under the workbench for years, then later moved it near the side wall because, in his words, a man should not have to dig for proof on his own property. I stayed completely still, listening. Creek below. Wind in the pines. A distant mower somewhere up in the development. No voices nearby. No golf cart hum. Just mountain silence and that old steel box catching a bar of noon sunlight like a signal. In town Louise had shown me enough to know Brenda was playing with selective paper. Standing there above the cabin, I realized my grandfather might have left me the one thing people like Brenda fear most. Not anger. Not threats. Not noise. Original evidence, sitting patient and quiet in the shadows, waiting for somebody in the family to come home and open it. I moved down the slope slow, careful where I placed my boots, letting the pine needles and soft dirt swallow what little sound I made. The closer I got to the cabin, the more the details started needling at me. Somebody had swept the porch. Not well, but recently. The old iron boot scraper by the front step had been painted black, the glossy kind that looked good in listing photos and wrong everywhere else. There was a lantern hanging beside the door that did not belong there, one of those decorative pieces bought in sets, made to suggest rustic life without ever having earned it. The cabin had not been abandoned. It had been staged. That was the word for it. Staged for strangers. Staged for brochures. Staged for the kind of people who wanted mountain history as long as it came with parking and signage and a curated trail loop back to their wine fridge. I crouched beside the green steel box and brushed a hand across the lid. Dust on top. Rust along the hinge. The metal smelled faintly like rain and cold pennies. Same as I remembered. The latch had not been forced. Just stiff with time. I worked it carefully until it gave with a dry little click that sounded louder than it should have in the noon quiet. Inside were folders wrapped in wax paper, a short length of survey tape, 2 carpenter pencils gone pale with age, and a bundle of folded documents held together with a rubber band so old it broke the second I touched it. My grandfather's handwriting was right there on the first outer sheet. Black hollow. Western boundary. Keep together. Seeing those block letters hit me harder than Brenda's chain ever had. It felt like a hand reaching across time and setting itself on my shoulder. I took the papers into the shade beside the porch and started unfolding them one by one. Survey copies. Tax maps. Waterline notes. A hand-drawn access sketch with creek turns and elevation marks in the margins. Then, halfway through the stack, I found the piece that made me stop breathing for a second. It was an older survey map, linen-backed and yellowed at the corners, with the original family boundary traced in dark ink. Not just the cabin tract. Not just the road. The whole valley floor. The creek corridor. The lower meadow. The timber rise to the west. Even the ridge approach where Silver Pine Reserve now sat polished and smug under its fresh stone entrance. There were later notations too, filed references from when my grandfather split small portions for tax efficiency but kept the controlling access and watershed rights tied together. That was why the county files had looked incomplete. Brenda and whoever worked with her had been treating the cabin like an isolated leftover parcel because it was simpler that way. Cleaner. Easier to market. But the old records told a different story, and old stories have teeth when they are attached to legal descriptions. I kept digging. Easement language. Road maintenance notes. A recorded marker reference tied to the limestone stone near the bend, the same one my grandfather had warned me about when I was a kid. Boundary, not rock. Boundaries matter. I could hear his voice as clear as if he were standing beside me in his canvas coat, coffee in hand, looking disappointed that I had let myself be surprised at all. My pulse had settled into something sharper now. Colder. Cleaner. This was no longer me wondering whether Brenda had overstepped. She had. Repeatedly. Deliberately. She had renamed what she did not own, branded what she did not build, and sold access to land she probably assumed nobody would defend with original paper in hand. I looked out from the porch toward the road shoulder where they had made a photo stop out of my family's front view and saw the whole trap for what it was. They had not counted on memory backed by documents. They had counted on absence. On dust. On delay. On the kind of silence that lets polished lies harden into local truth. I slid the most important papers back into their sleeves and took photos of every page with my phone, front and back, making sure dates, stamps, and signatures were clear. Then I tucked the originals into my pack with more care than most people use handling glass. The wind shifted across the valley and carried the creek up to me again, cold and steady over stone. For the first time since I saw that chain on the gate, I felt something close to calm. Brenda Whitmore thought she was protecting a narrative. What I had in my hands was better than a narrative. It was the spine of the whole valley, inked, measured, signed, and waiting for the right moment to break her little version of reality in half. I did not go marching back to the gate with the papers in my hand. That is what Brenda would have expected from someone running on anger. A loud reaction. A sloppy reveal. The kind of move that gives people time to start editing websites, shifting signs, and calling lawyers before the dust even settles. No, I zipped my pack, took one last look at the porch they had dressed up for visitors, and slipped back into the trees the same way I came. On the hike down, every piece of the valley looked different now that I knew exactly what I was standing on. The footbridge was not just a weathered crossing. It was documented. The limestone marker was not just an old family quirk. It was a legal corner reference. The creek that curled through the meadow and caught the late light like silver wire was not scenery for a brochure. It was part of a corridor tied to rights Brenda clearly did not understand. By the time I reached my truck, the first wave of anger had burned off and left something better in its place. Strategy. I drove straight back to town and made 3 stops. First was Louise at the recorder's office. She scanned the survey copies from my phone, compared parcel references, then went very still in the way competent people do when nonsense finally meets hard evidence. Well, she said, adjusting her glasses and looking back at the monitor, that is considerably larger than they have been implying. How much larger? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. The old boundary overlay swallowed the neat little preserve language whole. Cabin tract, valley floor, creek corridor, western rise, access road controls. Silver Pine Reserve was not wrapped around the valley. It was nibbling at the edges of something my family still held together on paper. Louise tapped the screen once. If these recordings match the originals, they have been marketing private amenities on land outside their authority. Outside their authority. There was a phrase my grandfather would have appreciated. My second stop was a surveyor named Caleb Reeves, a broad-shouldered man in sun-faded boots who had done line work for ranchers all over the county and still kept a rolled steel tape in his truck out of habit. He studied the photos, whistled once, then nodded toward the ridge on the wall map in his office. Your granddad knew exactly what he was doing, he said. He tied the useful parts together. Access, water, crossings. That is not accidental. That is defensive ownership. Defensive ownership? I like that even more. Caleb agreed to pull current overlays and walk the markers with me if needed, but he gave me the same advice Louise had in a different tone. Do not tip them off early. Let them keep using the land the way they have been using it. Let them keep calling it theirs where people can hear it. My third stop was less official but just as useful. Hank Miller had a fresh copy of the Silver Pine welcome packet behind his counter because one of the real estate agents had left a stack there like free church bulletins. He slid it across to me with a face that had gone from concern to anticipation. The paper smelled like expensive ink. Inside were glossy photos of the overlook, the bridge, the creek, and one picture that nearly made me laugh out loud. My cabin, framed by morning light, captioned as historic valley outpost along the private heritage loop. Private. That one word sat there shining on coated paper like a confession. I took the packet, thanked Hank, and stepped back out into the afternoon sun with evidence in my truck, original records in my bag, and something else beginning to take shape in my mind. Brenda Whitmore had not just fenced me out. She had built a public story around my land and invited people to admire it. Fine. Let her. Let her polish it. Let her smile through one more board meeting, one more sales event, one more little speech about preserving mountain character. Because the beautiful thing about a polished lie is that once it is printed, posted, and repeated enough times, it becomes very easy to prove exactly who told it. 3 days later, Silver Pine Reserve held what the glossy packet called a sunset welcome social, and if you have ever wanted to watch a lie dress itself up in string lights and catered cheese, that was the event. I parked half a mile down the county shoulder and walked in wearing clean boots, a denim jacket, and the kind of calm that only comes from having the truth zipped inside a weatherproof folder under your arm. The evening air had that sharp mountain chill that shows up right when the sun starts dropping behind the ridge. Someone had set out lanterns along the trail. Soft music drifted from portable speakers near the overlook. Wine glasses flashed in people's hands. The whole thing smelled like cedar smoke, expensive perfume, and fresh-cut rosemary from the catering tables. And right there, in the middle of it all, Brenda Whitmore stood under a timber arch welcoming residents and guests to what she called the Valley Experience. I stayed at the edge for a minute and watched her work. She had changed into a cream sweater and boots that probably had never seen real mud, and she spoke with that polished confidence of a woman who thought every inch of scenery behind her existed to support her argument. Our homeowners enjoy exclusive access to protected trails, heritage features, and private creekside viewpoints, she said, lifting one hand toward my family's valley like she had hung the sky herself. People nodded, smiled, took photos. One couple flipped open the brochure I had already read and admired the picture of my cabin as if it were a charming prop set out for their entertainment. Then Brenda brought them closer to the bridge, and that was my moment. I stepped forward through the soft crunch of gravel, and the first thing that changed was not the noise. It was the air. She saw me before she heard me. I watched recognition hit her face like a small crack under glass. Mr. Walker, she said, smile tightening. This is a private event. That is interesting, I said, my voice carrying just enough to turn nearby heads. Because you keep using that word on land that is not yours. The music kept playing for maybe 2 more seconds before someone near the speaker realized something was wrong and turned it off. The silence after that felt clean. Mounting clean. I set the folder on a standing cocktail table and opened it 1 page at a time. Original survey. Recorded boundary map. Creek corridor references. Access rights. Marker documentation tied to the limestone stone near the bend. Caleb Reeves, the surveyor, stood 20 feet behind me near the bridge rail with his own rolled plats under one arm. Louise from the recorder's office was there too, not speaking, just present in the steady way officials get when they know the paperwork is about to do all the talking for them. Brenda tried to recover fast. "These are legacy parcel misunderstandings," she said. "The association has filed preserve language with the county." "You filed language," I said. "You did not file ownership." I laid the welcome packet beside the survey map, open to the page showing the creek, the bridge, and my cabin labeled as private amenities. This road, this bridge, that creek corridor, the viewpoint, and the cabin tract are all inside the original Walker holdings, along with the entire valley floor tied to access and watershed rights. You sold the idea of exclusive use on land outside your